Well, to also start at the beginning, and maybe I can tell you a bit about my childhood. I didn't came from a family who had any connection to culture. My both parents are chemical engineers, but they shared a kind of a specific language. When my mother would ask my father how was his day, he would like say pH 5 or pH 4, depending on how was like the degree of tension or acidity, or if I wasn't focusing in my homework, they would say like, you're diluted, you need to crystallize. And on the other side, my grandfather, who also used to school me in the evenings, is this better? Had two passions. He had a passion for mathematics and mythology, so he would like pose to me problems where I had to find an equation to, like, let's say, solve a problem like Jason has to kill the Hydra. He only can. The Hydra has 7 heads, and you have to strike how many times to kill how many heads. So, like these kind of like questions had a resonance in me, because I think that all knowledge is transmitted through metaphors, and regardless of what you do, creativity is available to anyone. So I studied architecture, and I then went on like doing. I'm going to show very quickly like some images. These are sculptures which are in between furniture and spaces. I also like very much geometry, topology in particular, like this kind of triple knot chair, or solving problems like designing a better pedicab for Mexico City. Creating relationships is something that I like very much, for objects to create kind of human interaction. So in this chair, you need both persons to agree at the same time, and if one stands up, the other starts to sink. Or for instance, this is like a seesaw where you need 10 persons, and one has the power to lift the other 9, so it's a kind of representation of asymmetry or hierarchy. I was thinking at first, maybe it's the oppressor against the oppressed, but then I thought it can be also the power of one person to put in motion another group of persons, no? So the piece is called Leverage. An object which is as individual, like a hat, what happens when you turn that into a collective object? Or creating spaces to inhabit a different environment, like the sea, which often we use to move from one place to the other, but also can become a new kind of architecture. But today I'm going to talk in particular about 4 projects which are a bit more complex, and which deal with agency and aim to have some degree of effectiveness. One is Palas por Pistolas. This is, Palas por Pistolas means guns into shovels. This is the border between Mexico and the United States. Every day there's 2,000 weapons that enter Mexico. And in the last 5 years, there's been 50 million weapons that have entered. Why is this? It's because the current administration decided to make a war on drugs, and they have spent like all these resources like fighting the cartels. But on the other side, there's all these, there's 1,700 sale points of weapons that are incredibly easy to acquire for everyone, you know, like an assault weapons of high power. It's like a kind of there's a huge market for weapons that are bought in the United States and resold in Mexico. And all the cities in the world have become incredibly dangerous because of the extreme gun availability that you have on the north of the border. So I decided to make a project about trying to solve this issue, although it's a grain of sand. On occasion of a collector invited me to do a project for Culiacan, which is a city in western Mexico. And instead of doing a kind of sculpture in a rotonda or something that was expected as a kind of public art project, I told him, why don't we make a campaign to collect weapons? And he released a number of vouchers that you could trade in exchange for a weapon. We made a series of TV spots which were a little bit in the shape of soap opera, and they were airing the TV, and people were told that if they took a gun to the city hall, they would get also coupons that they could trade for a microwave or a fridge, etc. And what we did was we broke the record for voluntary donation of arms. Whoa. We collected 1,527 weapons. What we did was to make a public event where we had a steamroller crush all the guns, and then these guns were taken to a factory. I spoke with another collector who had a factory that produced hardware, and in a foundry we took all the guns, we melted them, and with the metal we fabricated the same exact number of shovels, 1,527. Which is, there wasn't a big design improvement or on the shovel itself. We used the same kind of system they use, but what changed was the source material of the metal. So we were mining out an agent of death and turning it into an agent of life. So the shovels are now used in schools to plant trees, and what I'm most interested is in the psychological transformation of a kid that helps to plant a tree with this shovel that he knows that the metal came from someone which could have taken his life. Quickly, another project, this is an architecture competition in another city in the north of Mexico called Monterrey. They already had a monument, which is this sculpture by Luis Barragan. And on occasion of the 200th anniversary of the independence, they asked artists and architects to come up with a design. So they expected probably a vertical monument. I decided to do the opposite, a very horizontal one, because instead of having an object where the public would be the kind of a spectator, I wanted to create a stage where the public and the citizens could become the actors. And it still has a wall, but I wanted a wall that instead of dividing people would allow you to cross from one side to the other. So I made a project with 100 walls which create a virtual volume, and another volumes are inserted to create negative spaces. So it works a little bit like a comb, so you can walk from one side to the other as a gate, but also walk along the whole series of walls. And I started working in this as a set of glasses that to try to explore what could be these transition spaces. It's a little bit like an abstract movie where you could have a spatial version of how these different spaces are formed. And luckily the project was chosen as the winner, so this is gonna be built, and probably it's one of the largest sculptures I ever dreamed of doing. It was 100 meters long. So it's 100 walls, and these are all the different cuttings that it has. And what I'm most interested is in how, as designer or architects or artists, we don't only need to think of what's the object, which I would call the hardware, but also what's the software. What kind of activities are going to take place in these spaces. So all these cuttings that are sections that create all these negative spaces were along this whole block create stages for different kind of a scale of events. So I offered to design also a weekly program. So for every day of the week, there's gonna be like a kind of a space that, for instance, the round spaces inside in this kind of downhill create like a theater, then there's like a space for screenings, a space for sports, etc. And it's very interesting how to design something which at the same time is a sculpture and serves a set of purposes. Then I'm going to move on to the third project that I want to show today, which is called the Urban Genome Project. Like here in Design Indaba, you hear all these amazing innovations that are happening in cities today. And I was interested in creating an index of ideas. Together with Joseph Grima, who's editor of Domus magazine, we got a grant from the Graham Foundation in Chicago to do a project of urban research, and we came with this idea of creating a genetic code of what are the practices that are most interesting today for improving urban life. So, same as the human genome was made, the first part is called prospecting, which is taking the samples. In November, there was a summit in Mexico where 2,000 mayors from all over the world came to this conference, and we made a marathon of interviews which take place in a mobile unit, which, because the conference was taking place in different parts of the city, and we had to chase all these representatives and delegates from different cities to collect what were the best ideas and best practices that are being implemented in all over the world. So it's like a kind of a unit that crashes like events, like these kind of conferences where there's like a microclimate with a high concentration of thinking and how to group and to make all these interviews. How does the interviews work? Which I would call the sequencing. The sequencing starts before the interview, when the person we're going to interview has a spreadsheet with a list of items that he chooses to talk about. So let's say that someone chooses to talk about water, bike lanes, and access to education. The way it works is that if later you look at all the interviews, that these checked items become simply the tags for how to browse the interview. So if you're interested in how to do bike lanes in your own city, then you're gonna see how all these interviews were made. And then we could make more specific interviews, because if you ask someone a generic question like how to make cities better, probably he's gonna say to you, well, you know, like we need to do cities more environmental and more democratic, and these very generic answers are not useful. We need very, very specific, almost at a tactical level. And then also then comes recombination. So we completed the first round of 500 interviews from the public sector, and then we're now in going to make a second event in April to collect interviews with private, social, and creative sector. So the last project I want to show today is also deals with content, but in a different way. It's a more entertaining subject. I wanted to understand a little bit like the idea, the history of how economy and politics have shaped the world in the last 200 years. And together with Karla, my wife, we have two children. One is a 3-year-old, and the other is girl is 5-year-old. And I was thinking, if my boy can have at 3 years like nearly 100 names for Star Wars characters and spaceships, they can, practically you can assimilate any kind of content. So why not assimilate also philosophy? So I decided to do this project, which started out of an invitation in Japan at the Yokohama Triennale, to do a puppet series about the economy, whose main characters are Karl Marx and Adam Smith. And it's like a kind of a debate about these ideas.
What? None of my theories are open for discussion, you hippie man.
Actually, I proved them all to be incomplete.
Incomplete? What do you mean?
You didn't solve the poor people problem under capitalism, did you?
Of the October Revolution. And now, comrades, let mock of a trial and bring some old-fashioned class struggle on these guys.
What you say, woman? Che is afraid or no one?
Look at this, Philippe. Behold, and be in awe.
It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker, but from their regard to their own self-interest.
These are just like rushes, like very just like a little taste. The project will be premiere at the Walker Art Center in August, and it's basically turning into a feature film where there's going to be a combination of interviews with real economists and philosophers, and also sketches by puppets and animations, which are this exploration of what is the kind of history and how can you tell this history of that we have fought so many wars about, and now we maybe have a little bit of more distance to talk. So it's been like a very long process of designing all these characters, working with Kumi Ota, which is a Japanese puppet maker. We work in the wheel, which is, I try to find the most abstract silhouette that conveys the nature of every character. And it's all like a process also of making the environment, the kind of design. And what I'm most interested is also in the, well, we can turn off this. What I'm most interested is in the counterfactual encounter of minds that didn't have the chance to meet in person, like Marx and Smith didn't have the chance to meet, but what would happen if they had the chance to talk to each other? Because these conversations happen in our mind when we read an author and then we read another, and we have this kind of dialogue. So this is like a departure point to writing this project. And I think that's it for today. Thank you very much.